I'm going to come down to the garden, and I want you, Adam, and you, Eve, to spend the Sabbath with me. I want us to rest together. And you say, well, that's not what Genesis says. Genesis says that God rested. That's true. But notice what Jesus says in Mark chapter 2 and verse 27. Mark chapter 2 and verse 27. And we'll read verse 28 also. Notice Jesus, who was the creator of the Sabbath, what he has to say. Mark chapter 2 and verse 27. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for whom? The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is also Lord of what? Lord of the Sabbath. For whom was the Sabbath made? The Sabbath was not made for God, because God doesn't need a Sabbath of rest. The Sabbath was made for man. And yet God rested, and he invited man to rest. Now, why would they rest together? Let me dramatize what happened that first Sabbath. By the way, the last thing that God makes on the sixth day is marriage. Do you notice that? He calls Adam and Eve, and he says, Adam, Eve, stand right here in front of me. We're going to have our first marriage here. And he pronounces those words. What God has joined together, let not man cast asunder. I declare you man and wife. He didn't say that. But he married them. And immediately after he marries them, the holy hours of the Sabbath begin. Now, have you noticed that during creation week, the first 6 days, God made things? On the seventh day, he made holy time. This shows us that time is more important than what? Than things. In fact, during the 6 days of labor and work, we remember the things of God. Whereas on the seventh day, the purpose is to remember the God of things. Now, allow me to mention what happened on that first Sabbath. God calls Adam and Eve. He's resting with them. It says so in Genesis. And Jesus says to Adam, well, Adam, what do you think? Well, Lord, you could have made that tree a little bit taller over there. I don't think so. Jesus says, do you like what you see? What do you think Adam said? Wow. How about those birds over there? Amazing. How about this wife that I gave you? Wow. How about this husband? Oh, marvelous. In other words, on that day, Jesus met with Adam and Eve, and they contemplated his work of creation. God said, all of this that you see, I made for you. It is my gift for you. But you might forget where this came from. So what I want us to do is every seventh day, you're going to interrupt your activities. You're going to interrupt your endeavors. And for 24 whole hours, I'm going to come to the garden, and we're going to contemplate what I made for you. The focus is going to shift from you to me. By the way, have you noticed that on the sixth day, God made Adam king of creation? He gave Adam and Eve dominion, the Bible says. But by creating the seventh day, God is saying to Adam and Eve, you are lords of creation, but the seventh day shows that I am your Lord. Because I made you. You're my creatures. And so every seventh day, Jesus promised to come and meet with Adam and Eve so that they could contemplate his works of creation, his marvelous works of creation. And in this way, their hearts would be filled with reverence and with love and with gratefulness because of the love and the wisdom of Jesus in giving them this gift. Notice that they had not worked for it. It was a gift. Is this true of salvation too? See, this is part 2. We're not dealing with the Sabbath and salvation in our lecture today. We're going to deal with that tomorrow because the Sabbath has an additional dimension. You see, the purpose of the Sabbath is to show that Jesus works and we simply receive gift and accept it. And keeping the Sabbath is a sign that we believe that He is the Creator, and that we're thankful and grateful to Him, and that we worship Him because He is our Creator. How about it? Can you imagine Adam saying, "You mean to say that I have to take a whole day a week out of my busy schedule? And we have 24 hours to spend all of my things so that we can just talk about you and what you've done? How is it, Lord, that you deliver unto me this yoke of bondage?" You know what I think Adam said? What Eve said? They said, "Jesus, couldn't we meet every day?" Because if they loved Jesus, would they want to spend that time of fellowship with Jesus? Yes. The sixth day, Jesus says, "Adam, I made you for Eve. Eve, I made you for Adam." But the seventh day says, "Adam and Eve, I made you for me. I am your Lord. I am your Creator. I made you for fellowship. Suspend your things and just come and enjoy rest with me." That was the original intent of the Holy Sabbath. And God knew that people might forget it. That's why in the fourth commandment He says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." Do you think that if the Sabbath was necessary at creation in a perfect world with a perfect Adam and Eve, if it was necessary to remind them about their roots, the source of their existence, how wonderful their Creator was, how much love He had for them by giving them all of these things free of charge without their working for them, do you think that Adam and Eve needed to remember who the Creator was? Obviously, yes, because the Sabbath was created for that purpose. Now, it's interesting that some individuals say that the Sabbath was okay in the Old Testament, but that the Sabbath does not apply to Christians today. I once had an interesting conversation with a pastor friend. He was not a pastor of the same church that I belong to. And just to play devil's advocate, I said to him, "You know what? I believe that it's perfectly okay for a man to marry a man and a woman to marry a woman." Now, I don't believe that. But I said that to him, and his eyes bulged. And he looked at me and says, "You as a pastor would say that you think that a man can marry a man and a woman a woman?" I said, "Sure. Why not?" And he looked at me and he says, "The answer is obvious. The Bible says that at the beginning, God made Adam and Eve. And He performed the first marriage between a man and a woman. And then I had him where I wanted him." And I looked at him and I said, "Okay, good point. What else did Jesus make at Creation Week?" And boy, you should have seen him. You could have heard a pin drop. And I'm still waiting for his answer. You see, the Sabbath was made at the same time as marriage. And so if you say that marriage still applies between a man and a woman, and you argue on the basis of creation, you must also argue on the basis of creation that the Sabbath is still binding. And by the way, some people say the Sabbath was for the Jews. Listen up to what I'm going to say. The Sabbath, no place in the Bible does it say that the Sabbath was the Sabbath of the Jews. Furthermore, Adam was not a Jew, because the name Jew comes from Judah, one of the sons of Jacob. In fact, the Sabbath, some people say, well, the Sabbath was a symbol of the rest that we have in Jesus when He died on the cross to give us a spiritual rest. Listen, folks, when the Sabbath was created, there was no need for any Redeemer because man had not sinned. The Sabbath is part of God's original plan for man. It is not an afterthought of God. Well, I'll give them the Sabbath now to show them the rest that I'm going to give them someday when I die on the cross. There was no need for a cross when the Sabbath was created. There was no Jew, so you can't say that the Sabbath was made for the Jews. Am I making myself clear? The Sabbath is a creation institution. Now I'd like to ask the question, when does the Sabbath begin? This is very important. You know, some people say, I keep Sunday, and what they do is go to church on Sunday. It's not the same to go to church on Sunday or go to church on Saturday as observing the Sabbath the way the Bible says.